All right, so we're diving into AI today.
Which I am very excited about.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of articles, expert opinions, everything from the Wall Street Journal to VentureBeat.
Right.
And we're going to try to figure out by the end of this deep dive if people should be excited about AI, scared, or maybe a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things, right? Like, where do you even start?
I know.
AI, it's already,
It's everywhere you look.
it really is everywhere you look.
And I think people have this idea that it's like this far off thing, like in the future, robots are going to be serving us margaritas, and I'm here for it.
Okay, I like where your head's at.
But it's not quite there yet.
Not quite yet, no.
But there are things that AI is already doing that are subtly shaping our world. Like, I was reading this Fox Weather article the other day, and apparently AI is making weather forecasting, scarily accurate.
Like, gone are the days of, stepping outside and being like, well, the weather app lied to me again.
Right. Or how about, video games?
Oh, yeah.
VentureBeat had this whole thing about how AI is making games crazy realistic these days.
Oh, yeah. So real.
Which, if you think back to, the early days of video games, pixelated blobs chasing each other around.
Yeah, totally.
AI is just, completely changing the game,
Okay, so we're not quite at Terminator levels of AI takeover yet, but it's getting more integrated into everything we do.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here?
So there's this thing, right?
Okay.
It's called artificial general intelligence.
Uh-oh.
Or they call it AGI for short.
AGI. Okay. And it's like the next level of AI.
Okay.
And it's basically the Wall Street Journal, they had this great article about it. They described AGI. It's like, imagine a computer that can actually think like a human.
Oh, wow.
Like not just follow instructions, but actually understand, learn, and reason.
Like it can make its own decisions.
Yes, exactly. And this is where things get really interesting, but also kind of freaky, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Because if we can actually create a machine that can think like us, what does that mean for humanity?
Right. Are we talking about a whole new species here?
Some experts even think that this could be the key to solving some of the world's biggest problems.
No way.
Yeah, curing diseases, tackling climate change, stuff like that. Okay, so it's powerful, but also potentially risky if it's not used for good, right?
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword. And livescience.com, they're talking about how we have to be really careful about how we develop AGI because
it could be incredibly beneficial, but it could also pose some serious risks if it's not handled responsibly.
Okay, so ethical AI development. That's a whole other conversation we're going to have to get into.
Oh, absolutely.
So we've got AI today, which is already doing some pretty impressive things, and then we've got AGI on the horizon, which has the potential to be either amazing or the beginning of a sci-fi movie marathon, depending on how we handle it.
You got it.
All right, so where do we even begin to unpack all of this? It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But for now, let's bring it back down to earth a little bit. Even if this super intelligent AGI is a while off, we've got AI doing its thing right now, and it's already having a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. And it's only going to get bigger, right? We were talking about the Wall Street Journal article earlier.
Yeah, the one about AI and healthcare and finance and all that.
Yeah, exactly. They were saying that AI could boost the global economy by trillions of dollars in the coming years.
That trillions.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
How's that even possible?
Well, think about it. AI can automate a lot of those tasks that are, time-consuming for us humans.
Right, those tedious things nobody actually enjoys doing. Exactly. So instead of spending hours on paperwork or data entry, people can focus on more creative, strategic work.
That makes sense. So it's not necessarily about replacing jobs altogether, but more changing the nature of work itself.
Yeah, it's about working smarter, not harder, right? And IDC, they had this report where they were saying that AI could create millions of new jobs in fields we haven't even thought of yet.
Okay, now that's exciting. New jobs, a booming economy, AI sounds pretty great so far.
Yeah.
But I know there are concerns about AI and job displacement, and the Wall Street Journal article even touched on that.
Right, and it's definitely something to be aware of. It's not all sunshine and roses,
So how do we prepare for that? How do we make sure that everyone benefits from this AI revolution, not just a select few?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Education is going to be huge, right? We need to be teaching people the skills that AI can't replicate.
What kind of skills are we talking about here?
Things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, the things that make us uniquely human.
So it's not enough to just be good at coding or whatever.
Right. It's about being adaptable, being able to learn and evolve as the technology changes.
Because, let's be real, this AI stuff is changing all the time.
Oh, constantly. It's like every day there's a new breakthrough, a new article about some crazy AI application.
Speaking of which, Yahoo Finance had this whole thing about NVIDIA.
Oh, yeah, the AI chip stock to own.
Yes. They were saying that NVIDIA's chips are like the driving force behind all this AI development.
And they're not wrong. Those GPUs, or graphics processing units, they're like the secret sauce of AI.
GPUs, isn't that like what gamers use for their graphics cards?
They are. But it turns out those same chips are also incredibly good at the kind of complex calculations that AI requires.
So it's like the same technology that powers those crazy realistic video games.
Yeah. Like the ones we were talking about earlier, they're also being used to, like, develop self-driving cars and power facial recognition software.
That's wild. So is NVIDIA like calling all the shots when it comes to AI?
Well, they're definitely a major player, and that's something that the Motley Fool was talking about, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
risks of, like, one company having too much control over this technology.
That makes sense. It's like what happens if something goes wrong? Or if they decide to like use their power for, not so great purposes.
Exactly. It's a huge responsibility. And it's not just about companies either. The South China Morning Post, they had this whole article about the AI arms race that's happening between the U.S. and China.
An AI arms race. Okay, now we're talking sci-fi movie stuff, for real.
I know, right? But it's serious. It's like whoever controls AI controls the future.
That's a lot of pressure. So it's not just about like who has the coolest algorithms, it's about global power and influence and all that.
Pretty much.
Mm.
And it gets even crazier, right? Like the Motley Fool was saying that even something like the Fed's interest rate cuts could impact AI stocks.
Whoa, hold on. How does that even work?
Well, it's all connected,
Yeah.
Lower interest rates make it cheaper for companies to borrow money,
Right.
which usually means they can invest more in research and development, which is good, right?
Makes sense.
But AI is already like a super expensive field.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So even with lower rates, it's still a huge gamble for companies to invest in AI.
Wow, so much to unpack here. It's like we've got the economic side, the geopolitical side, and we haven't even scratched the surface of the ethical questions yet.
It's a lot. But that's what makes it so interesting, right?
You're right about that. Okay, so next up, we're going even deeper. We're talking ethics, we're talking the really big questions about the future of AI. Stay tuned, folks. This is where things get really interesting. All right, so we're back, and it's time to tackle the big questions, the ones that keep people up at night. Like, what happens if we create an AI that's actually smarter than us?
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? The existential question about AI.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about creating something that could potentially outthink us, outmaneuver us, even, dare I say, outlive us. Right. It's like we've all seen those sci-fi movies where the robots take over and.
And we're like, oh, why did we invent that?
Exactly. But the thing is, even the people who are building these AI systems, the top experts in the world, they'll admit that they don't fully understand how AI thinks.
Really?
Yeah, like we can feed all this data into a computer. It can process it at lightning speed, come up with these incredibly accurate predictions.
Right, like we were talking about with the weather forecasting and all that.
Exactly. But the why, the how behind those predictions, it's still kind of a mystery.
So we're basically saying, hey, let's create this powerful thing that we don't even fully understand. Well, it's more like we're trying to understand it as we go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like AI research is all about pushing those boundaries, seeing what's possible. But it's true, there's a certain leap of faith involved.
Okay, I get that. But how do we know where to draw the line? Like, at what point do we say, okay, this is getting a little too real, let's maybe slow down?
Well, that's where the ethics come in, right? Like we were talking about earlier.
Right, right.
And this is something that the Literary Hub, they had a really thought-provoking piece about.
Okay, yeah.
About how even with all of AI's abilities, like it can write music, it can write poetry, it can even code now.
It's crazy.
Right. But even with all that, it still lacks something that we humans have. True creativity.
Really? So you're saying it can mimic, but it can't actually create?
Exactly. Like take ChatGPT, for example, right? Which, by the way, I'm sure everyone listening has probably already played around with by now.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere.
It's amazing. Like you can ask it to write a poem about, a cat eating a cheeseburger, and it'll spit something out in seconds that, rhymes and has meter and all that.
And it probably makes more sense than some of the poetry I read in college.
Right. But the thing is, it's not really creating something new, is it?
Mm.
It's drawing on this massive database of existing human creativity.
So it's like remixing rather than actually composing.
Exactly. It's taking what we've already done and rearranging it in new ways, which is impressive in its own right.
Right.
But it's not the same as like that spark of inspiration, that uniquely human ability to connect with emotions and experiences and translate that into art.
That makes me feel a little bit better, actually. Like we still have something special that AI can't replicate.
Exactly. At least not yet.
Oh, there's that caveat again.
Well, I got to keep things interesting. But seriously, like
Yeah.
AI is constantly evolving, right? What seems impossible today could be totally normal tomorrow.
True. True.
That's why it's so important to keep asking these questions, to keep having these conversations.
And that's what we're here for.
Exactly. We got to stay curious, stay informed, and, maybe approach things with a healthy dose of caution.
I like that. Curious, informed, and cautious. Sounds like a good motto for navigating the world of AI.
I think so.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap things up. This deep dive has been enlightening, to say the least. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the practical implications of AI in our daily lives to the big existential questions about the future of humanity.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure.
It is, but hopefully our listeners are walking away feeling like they have a better understanding of what AI is, what it can do, and what we need to be thinking about as we move forward.
And hopefully not too scared to sleep tonight.
Haha. No killer robots under the bed, we promise. But seriously, thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.